Good evening. Good evening, First Assembly. This is Parenting on Purpose. This is our 10th session. Thank you for joining. And hopefully, if you've missed any and you'd like to go back, you're able to find those. You're able to do those. If you are not able, go ahead and contact the church, and someone will be able to point you to where the other sessions are. As you can see on your screen, our main screen, our main slide, Parenting on Purpose, that the generation to come will know. That's why that's really the bottom line of this entire series, that we have to be intentional Christian parents in order for the generations to come to know. And where have we been so far? We've covered foundations of our calling, heart training in session 4, sessions 5 through 8, love, respect, and kindness in various domains and areas of life. And then last session was 9, encouragement, empowerment, correction, part 1. And this is part 2. When we left off talking about guiding through encouragement and the difference between goal incentives and bribes and rewards. And I hope you understood all that and have really taken inventory of how you use them in your home and how you can best utilize them to train your children's hearts. And train various skills in their life. And yeah, I'll not review all those principles, but we're moving on to guiding through empowerment. And empowering kids, this is such a great word, because we could just leave it as encouragement and correction, but the empowerment part is really a duty of us as Christian parents. We want to empower them. We are not they are not the puppet, and we're not the puppet master, and we're not just controlling them. But although I feel like out of fear, Christian parents will often become that, or maybe divert to that because we're afraid of our kids believing something else or not behaving in a certain way, and so we can be very authoritarian to control everything. But really, our job is to empower them to be able to live for God, to show Jesus in this world without us. And so it's empowering them spiritually. It's empowering them in a lot of different ways. And if you remember back to the warehouse illustration, it's about tending their warehouse, their heart warehouse. So I have a list of 13 things we're going to look at on the next slide. And I don't know, let's just go ahead and start those. Giving them choice and control. Again, you can kind of default into being so controlling that you really don't give your kids an opportunity for choice. Choice is empowerment. Choice is giving them just a little bit of power, a little bit of control, and that's okay, because you have to gauge this. I'm not saying to give them all choice and all control, but as they get older, as they go through life, as they grow up in your home, that you are intentionally giving them choices and control. And this is especially necessary if you do have a child who's been through some type of trauma. Think about this with me. A child who, let's say you've adopted, or you do foster care, or maybe your child has just been through something traumatic. In that moment, they lost all control. Somebody controlled them, or the situation was out of their control. And what a child will often revert to, and we do this as adults too, revert back to gaining control. And many times you'll see this in kids who have been through trauma, that the thing they crave the most and try to get the most is control. They can try to be very controlling and very belligerent, that their way is the only way and they're not doing going with any other way. And that's, again, that's looking that's what's the need behind the behavior. With many times kids are looking for choice and control. So as a parent, as a Christian parent, what ways can you give them choice and control at a level that you're not giving them all of it, but you're letting them grow up and be empowered? You have to take that inventory yourself. 2, listen to them and verbally acknowledge what they said. I know there are times where we're really busy, and maybe we're cooking or doing something else, and our kids are talking to us, and it's or we're working on the computer and they're talking to us. And please make it a point to stop what you're doing, to pause what you're doing, and to truly listen. And even if you're doing something let's say you are making dinner. Is there a way for you to ask them to join in helping you so that you're working together and still talking, and rather than you doing your thing and you just giving them the yeah, So verbalize what they're saying. Verbalize or at least acknowledge what they've said. Oh, so you felt really this, and it's really powerful for you to acknowledge what they might have been feeling at that time. So you must have been feeling such and such when this happened to you in school today. That's called active listening. That's good. That's necessary and great to have a solid marriage. It's necessary for the entire household. A lot of families don't engage in it. Active listening, saying back to the person what you believe they've said, or maybe your interpretation of what they've said, and it gives them the opportunity to say, "Well, yeah, I really did feel that," or "No, that's really not it at all. Let me explain further." Be an active listener with your kids. Bottom line. Consistently verbalize your love and pride for them, and be specific about it. We covered that in the previous session when it comes to having praise as a reward. But if you're not an encouraging person, or if you weren't raised in an encouraging family, I know it's harder for you, but your kids need this. They need to know the specific things about them, or the way they live in this world and the choices they make, that there are specifics that you're very proud of and you love them. Think of those two magical things. They need to know consistently that you love them and that you're proud of them. Those are two things. Meta-communicate to help them to self-loving and emotionally growing. Now, that's a big word, I know, and it's not a common word. And it's one that I use as a therapist, and I wholeheartedly believe it. I see it work as such a great empowerment with kids. And I know that as a tool for parenting, or it is a valuable tool for parenting, but I don't hear it talked about very much. Meta-communicating is talking about the thought process. Meta-communicate is when you say to your child, or let me say the difference between it. There are times when you say, "I'm really proud of you for this." Meta-communicating is helping them get in touch or empower them to feel it in their heart as well. So it's like, wow, you must have been very proud of the way you went and sat by a kid who had no friends. You must be very proud. That must feel really good in your heart. You see what I'm doing there? They need to know their parents are proud of them. But if you really want to empower them to understand what's going on in their heart, and planting this and maybe watering the seed more, don't have it just be to pleasing you, because I do that as a therapist. If I get into telling a child, "Wow, you did great on that," then they start to please the therapist. And yes, parents, you want your kids to or they will want to please you, okay? But you want that to go a little bit deeper, where they're actually pleasing God in their hearts and recognizing it, because they might not even recognize it. So meta-communication, again, is more than, it's taking a step beyond "I'm proud of you." And don't stop doing that. Keep doing that. But it's, wow, that must be really good. You must feel a sense of pride. It must feel good to be used by God to touch someone else's life. See what I've done there? See what that statement does? That statement is so weighty. The statement is, you were used by God, and it must feel really good in your heart. And you've awakened them to that understand. Oh yeah, it does. And maybe that didn't even enter their mind, but you've helped them, you've empowered them to live that way, to have that heart in the future. Number 5, teach them to protect and respect boundaries. Of course, you're going to teach them safety and to have boundaries in their own life that people aren't allowed to cross, but then to respect other people's boundaries. And if you've never read the book called Boundaries, please read it. It's another one of those books that I say all believers should read, all people should read. It's such a great book to understand that we not only have the right to set boundaries in our life, but really the responsibility. And your kids could learn at a young age that they can set boundaries and they respect other people's boundaries. And I'm not going to go into what all of those boundaries could be, but you read the book and you interpret that for your household. Number 6, Allow them to take risks. Let's not be so protective of our kids that that we don't let them take a risk. And I'm not talking. I think that a lot of you right there probably thought of physical, like climbing a tree or whatever, and that might be part of it. You might be so protective that they're not allowed to do anything that's physical risky behavior. But I'm saying also emotional type things, to take a risk to do something nice for someone, to take a risk to back what we talked about, giving up their seat for someone. That is a risk, because you don't know how that person's going to respond. And so there are emotional risks, the risk of going to someone and asking for forgiveness because of your child did something they feel bad about. That's a risk, because you don't know how that person's going to respond. And so there are a lot of different risks involved. Let's not try to keep our kids in a bubble that to protect them from pain. Of course, we're not going to just send them out to receive hurt and emotional pain, but let's empower them by letting them live their lives in ways that might not be really typical for kids, because we don't have a typical faith. We're believers in this world and supposed to be an instrument of love and grace and peace in this world. 7, use your words wisely. Again, that's maybe goes without saying, but before you say something, think about how you're going to say it. Think about, is it laden with shame? Is it laden with guilt? There's such thing as good guilt when we feel bad, but parents can use guilt as a tool and shame as a tool so often. And so use your words wisely. We'll talk more about that when we talk about forgiveness and restoration. 8, encourage them to follow their interests. Whatever it is, you might have a child who has an interest that you never had, and it might be hard for you to think of how they would even be interested, but encourage that. You never know which way they're going to grow in life. I believe that when the psalmist said, train up a child in the way they should go, it's a holistic view. We take that as a holistic. We often think of it's a discipline verse, but no, the way they should go, help them explore the world, help them to understand what gifts that God has given to them and the skills that they'd like to develop. And do you empower them for the future by letting them explore things? I think of times when my son David wanted to build things, and there were times I just let him, times I really could have come alongside him and tried it with him. And so on one hand, it was great because he learned in the process, and he makes incredible woodworking. The crib he built for my grandson, and he's just amazing at woodworking because he decided to embrace that and decided to go on YouTube and learn from it. He didn't learn it from me, but I'm glad he followed that interest. 9, allow your child to express emotions without shaming. I've already talked about that. 10, set them up for success with rest, hydration, and nutrition. This is especially true for a child who's been through some type of emotional upheaval or some type of trauma, because their body will often react to their past, or often react to something that's going on. Sometimes their first response is to fight, flight, or freeze. They have a physical reaction, and we can help that by helping them be physically the best they can be. So not just kids who have been through trauma, but any child that they have good rest, that they don't get to decide their sleep schedule, that you're part of that. And hydration, dehydration has been linked to aggression. So I don't know if you've ever noticed that in yourself. When you're dehydrated, not only do you could go all the way to the point of being lightheaded and maybe even in throwing up, but people tend to be much more aggressive when they're dehydrated. So make sure they're hydrated, be on top of water, and of course nutrition. If they are living on junk all the time, this is not helping their emotional and spiritual life either. And we're not going to go deep into that. I love all kinds of foods. I love junk. I've just discovered in this past year of my life that my incredible love for three certain flavors of Pop-Tarts, and I have to not buy them at times, although sometimes I do give in. But if we lived on Pop-Tarts, so we lived on Doritos, if we lived on just mac and cheese all the time, like kids would love to, that's not helping them. So we have to don't give up in that area because you say, well, I'm really doing well in the spiritual area. We have to look at your entire child, the holistic development of your child. 11, set them up. Teach them to not allow others to control their emotions. This is so important, and I hope you're tracking with me, even though we've had one slide up there for a long time. But we live in a time in American history where, and I've referred to this before when it comes to social media, but it used to be, or at least, not even used to be. Let me say, as a therapist, when someone comes to me and they're struggling with something, and maybe they're struggling with self-esteem and the things that people say and do is really just has taken a toll on them, my goal is to help them not be controlled by what other people say. All right, because really, I want to develop in them an emotional strength, not divert to an emotional weakness. And emotional weakness often involves blaming, okay, or looking for someone to blame. And we can all be that. I mean, not just kids, adults are that way. And I think as a society, we've come to the crossroad of what you're doing and what you're saying is making me mad, so you have to change. And that's not empowering people. That's not helping people be emotionally strong. Being emotionally strong is, I understand that you don't like what I said or like what I've done, but I am not changing based on your anger towards me, or I'm not changing based on what you've done to me. See, when we often use the phrase, "Wow, they really made me mad," let's kind of get rid of that talk with our kids, because I see that almost as a surrender. They made you mad, so they took over your emotions and made you mad, or did you surrender your emotions? And I know that's a big concept to talk about with kids, but I'm more talking to you parents at this moment of how you process this issue and then communicate it to your kids. But when we say someone made me mad, no, let's not even go there. They did something that really irritated me, but I am not going to respond in such a way that is on the same level, because then I've let them control me. Your emotions are your emotions. Don't let other people have the control of those emotions. And again, it's really easy to say. There's not a switch that we just flip to all of a sudden change that. It is a process. And maybe it's a process you need to work on in your own life, in your own heart, in your own emotions, and then help your children through it as well. I talked about the book called Unoffendable, which one that I recommend for all Christians to read. Is very short. And that idea that I am not going to allow the conditions outside of me, I'm not going to allow someone else's words or behavior to control my emotions. There are times where I'm going to get upset. I can't just become a robot and not have emotions. But I am not going to surrender that control to other people, because that's what I'm doing when I allow them to make me mad. So help them to understand to not let others control their emotions. Number 12, celebrate their individuality and never negatively compare them. And when I compare them to other kids, compare them to kids in the neighborhood, compare them to each other as siblings. Well, if you would be more like your brother or more like your sister, and some of you are horrified to even, or you're saying, I would never talk that way. Well, that's great. But some parents do, and they do it. They think they're doing it real subtly, and they think they're doing it to help one child get better or improve. And there's a way to do that without shame and condemnation. You can celebrate that this child in your family did this certain thing, and then the others kind of aspire to it. That's a great way to teach them without saying, well, I want you to be more like your brother in this way. 13, communicate and lead in opportunities to be used by God to touch others. This has been woven throughout this series, but I believe it has to be on a list of empowering kids, because this idea of having a mission in this world, which I will come back to more than once through the rest of this series, we have a mission in this world to be used by God to touch others. And our kids need to understand that this isn't something they wait for. It doesn't happen all of a sudden in their teen years when they go on a missions trip, which I'm afraid is kind of the pattern sometimes in church life. No, as a child, there are things that you can do to touch others' lives out of kindness, love, and respect that that in your heart you realize God used me. I allowed God to use me. And parents, you have to be strategic to create opportunities for you to do these things as a family, to be that lighthouse in your neighborhood, as I've said before. So that's kind of like my big list of how we empower kids to go on and live this life that we want them to embrace as adults and throughout their lifetime. We're moving on now to guiding through correction. And when you think of correction, in the early years, you are putting character into your child and you're exchanging wisdom for foolishness. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a child by nature is self-oriented. But being a Christ follower is supposed to be other-oriented. So there's a tension there. There's a tension in your life, in my life, of those things all the time. It's not that we just arrive and these things get easier, but we have to be intentional. We are still sinful. We come to Christ and we understand His grace and forgiveness, but yet we still make such selfish choices. And for us to facilitate a process where they're recognizing it, and when we're putting in wisdom into their heart, think of the warehouse again, putting in wisdom which crowds out the foolishness. When correcting your child, first of all, the type of correction is going to depend on the presence or absence of a wrong motive. I've seen parents that will come down really hard and punish their child. Like I heard about, you're grounded for a month because you had something in the house you weren't supposed to, and you scratched the floor, or something that is, yes, maybe you've told them not to do this in the house and they disobeyed and there's a scratch, but really to be grounded for a month, how is that related? Let's look at the wrong motive involved. We don't punish a child who walked outside when you told them to stay inside, the same as a child who just went over and punched their brother or sister in the face. Those are different. So when we're going to make a correction, we need to understand what was the motive behind it. The child who stepped outside, was it because they saw something that needed to be fixed? Maybe it was something very innocent that you need to kind of look at the whole context. So when we make these assessments on a child's actions, we need to ask, were my child's actions accidental or intentional? Was it a mistake or was it a malicious intent? Because childishness is that innocent maturity, those mistakes. Foolishness is willful defiance. But they can both happen with the same event, the same scenario. For example, if my child comes, let's say we're having people over to eat, and my child comes, no, let's say we're at someone else's house, but there's so many people there that we're not really eating at tables, and your child comes in with a plate, and maybe they've come in too quickly and something falls off of their plate. All right, it was a childishness. I'm not saying they made a bad choice there or anything. It just happened. It could be a little clumsy, or maybe they didn't really think through the whole event and what could happen. Now, if you said to them, listen, there's carpet here and your plate is not, it's kind of a flimsy plate, so I want you to sit over here so that we don't get anything on Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so's carpet or whatever. And then they decide, they have chosen to defy you. So there's a difference between childishness and foolishness. When you have equipped their heart with a directive and they willfully go against that directive, that's foolishness. Childishness is just some of the things that happen. And let me go back to shame here for a moment. It breaks my heart, and maybe you experience this in your life as a child, but when we shame and correct our kids for accidents, that does not help their heart. That does not help them understand a God of grace and love and mercy. For a child to spill their cereal or spill their milk and then to be berated for for an accident. If they did it in the while disobeying, or if they did it doing something you warned them against before. I get that. You still don't have to become so angry and shaming them about it. But if they've just done an accident, you are a picture of God to them. You are the main picture of God's love and grace to them as their Christian parent. And so to shame them for something that is an accident, all that does is make them shame themselves. All that does is set them up for self-shame, because in their minds, they're not usually saying, well, my parent was wrong on this. In their minds, they're usually saying, my parent is right on this. There's something wrong with me. I should be ashamed. And so they're always shaming themselves for accidents. And then they can become so hard on themselves and take perfectionism to a whole an extreme that's not healthy at all. So that was kind of a side note, but a very important one. Let your child make mistakes. Let them have their childishness, and it's up to you to look at the motive, to assess what was going on in their heart. See, correction, a child is not acting childish if he is disobedient. Okay? He's acting foolish. Foolish behavior needs correcting, but parents should not correct all foolish behavior the same way or with the same strength of consequence. As I've said earlier, the punishment or consequences must fit the crime, because punishment sets a value on it. So because the child, you're developing in them not just a holding to standards, but you're developing them a sense of justice. And the sense of justice is established through correction, not rewards. But so parents will make the mistake of under punishing at times. You punched the neighbor kid in the face. Oh, well, no dessert for you tonight. Really, that's the whole under punishing, or they'll over punish and go way overboard and exasperate the child, which Paul spoke of in Ephesians that we'll look at another time in this series. But don't exasperate your children. Don't go overboard so that they're just so defeated and so deflated and not even learning from the experience, but just wallowing in it. But again, don't under punish either, because they need to understand the weight of what they've done. Consider the following before you make a decision. What was the frequency? What's the frequency of this, what my child just did? Is this something they do all the time? The context, or is it something, let's say the frequency, is it something they did yesterday? The context, is this, do I need to know more about the situation before I react? Some parents react way too quickly and don't let their kids talk about what happened. What's the age? Because the lie of a 3-year-old is a lot different than the lie of a 12-year-old. 3-year-old, the innocence and the protection of trying to not get in trouble or please mommy and daddy or whatever, there's a big difference there, and you need to consider that. And 4, the overall characterization of the child's behavior. Is this something they've been doing? Well, I talked about that in frequency. The characterization of their behavior is, how are they in the moment? Are they being very angry about that? Are they angry that they were caught, but you don't really see a contrite heart? We'll talk about that in another session as well. But are they, or let's say a report has come from one of your kids that that this child has done something. What is their behavior at the moment? Are they standing there with their arms crossed and they angry about it? Because sometimes the characterization of what's going on gives away what truly happened. So consider all of those things. Okay, so earlier I talked about the idea of pouncing or waiting to pounce. And it's easy to kind of fall into this trap, because we want, especially if you were maybe raised in an authoritarian home and you want to correct your kids on the narrow way, and you want to correct them in a way that molds their heart. But rather than waiting when you see them walking towards the line or doing something that or doing something that is going to be characterized as disobedience or defiance, rather than waiting to pounce on them, you give them a verbal warning. For me to say to my son David, who I used in an illustration with the church foyer, church lobby, many sessions ago, say, David, I notice your friends are running around, and we've already talked about this, and so I'm depending on you to go by what we expect. And so he's walking around the church lobby with his friends, and they're running, but I see he's not running. And I said, David, I know this is kind of difficult, so why don't you just come stand by me? And because those boys are still running around, and someone could get hurt, and I don't want you to be tempted, and I don't want you to be lumped in with what's going on either, because I know you know better. So why don't you stand right here? So I've given a verbal warning, a physical action, and then correction if he would decide to run away from me and go run anyway. Then he has disobeyed. That's defiance, and there's a correction involved or a consequence. So once again, with consequences, you need to ask yourself, were my child's actions accidental or intentional? Was it a mistake or malicious intent? And like I said earlier, we will come back to what do you do with after this? How do you lead them to repentance or forgiveness, restoration? Those are all important biblical concepts that have to be implemented in our families. So tune in next week, when we will talk more about those. Thanks for being part of this. Again, I hope these things have been helpful in parenting and shepherding your kids' hearts. And I will see you next week for session number 11.